Hello, and welcome back to the Glossy Week in Review podcast. I'm your host, senior fashion reporter Danny Parisi, and I'm here with our editor-in-chief, Jill Manoff. Hello, Jill.
Hello, Danny. How are you?
I'm good. I was just saying before the recording, I'm glad I could make it because my power was very close to going off last night. There was a very bad storm in New York City, but I think we're all good. I hope my power doesn't go off in the middle of this recording.
We made it.
We made it. This week, the big news we're going to be covering is Supreme's surprise sale to EssilorLuxottica, sold by VF Corp earlier this week. We're also going to talk about the Coperni show going down at Disneyland at Paris Fashion Week. And then finally, we'll touch on Balenciaga keeping the flag flying for the Apple Vision Pro. They released a new app for it, even though the sales of the Vision Pro are not so great. But let's start with the Supreme sale. So like I said, it was big news of the week. Not so much surprising to me that Supreme was sold. Like they got bought by VF Corp, I think 3 or 4 years ago. Their sales kind of went down. They didn't totally tank, but like they kind of weren't flourishing either. VF also had a bunch of debt. So like that's not too surprising to me that they sold Supreme. What's more surprising is that it was bought by EssilorLuxottica, which is obviously this huge eyewear company. They own Ray-Ban and Oakley's, and they do a lot of licensed, glasses and eyewear for other brands. Their entire focus is on eyewear. I think Supreme is the only fashion brand. Some of their brands do glasses and also some apparel, but are primarily glasses. Like Oakley's, I think, does do like t-shirts and stuff, but primarily for sunglasses. Supreme will be their only fashion brand. So kind of a interesting choice for them to scoop up Supreme. They also bought it for $1.5 billion, which is less than what VF Corp bought it for, over $2 billion. Not a huge drop, but significant 25% discount, basically. Yeah, I was very kind of just interested by this whole thing. What do you think, Joe?
So surprising. Yeah, I wasn't watching the Supreme closely to know, this was not top of mind. So when this happened, obviously, we were recently talking about eyewear and the dominant EssilorLuxottica. And wow, the fact that VF said they want to sell it off because they determined there are limited synergies and that this would be a natural next step. Well, obviously, this is kind of, I don't know, some rando in the middle of this eyewear conglomerate now. And they had some reasons. I thought that they were valid, and we'll see how they do with it. But they were saying, well, first of all, there's reports that they have amazing distribution in the luxury category, and they're more luxury focused all around. And, as streetwear and luxury kind of collide, it makes kind of more sense for Supreme to be there just because of the tiers of customers that we're working with here. And then there was some analysis about how they're I would say it's almost safeguarding for the future, where they see, I'm talking EssilorLuxottica sees a lot of their partners who they have licenses for, these luxury brands, becoming more reticent to offer control of their licenses to outside companies. And that's a large part of their business. So they probably see it going away. They want to get into a new area and lean in and see how they can kind of balance things.
Yeah, no, I hadn't even thought of that, but you're so right. I've definitely heard that a lot of brands are a little bit less interested in licensing. EssilorLuxottica does a big licensing business, and then they go and buy their own brand. Like that all kind of makes sense. I hadn't thought of it like that.
But streetwear, I have to ask, like, what's your thought? Like, as somebody who follows streetwear fairly, I don't know, closely, definitely. Supreme, it's still cool. Like, is streetwear still happening? Obviously, it's fizzled.
It's definitely, I think, fizzled a little bit, especially from a couple of years ago where there was like this huge kind of craze around Supreme. But I wouldn't say it's like, floundering or anything. Like if you look at the numbers that VF has reported, it's like Supreme sales went down a little bit during the last couple of years, but they didn't tank or anything. They again, like they didn't flourish. They did not hit I think VF had set a $600 million annual sales goal for them, and they never crossed it. But I think they went from like $580 million a year to like $530 or something. So a drop, but like not anything crazy. I do think their cultural kind of footprint has shrunk a little bit. I think we were talking the other day about my personal feeling, and I don't know if this is like kind of the main factor, is I sort of feel like the shtick is a little tiring, where it's like whenever a new Supreme product comes out, I'm like, oh, let me guess, it's going to be red. Like it's not, I feel like they have this super strong branding and like this super strong image that they stick to very religiously. And that was, I think, a selling point for them. And then now, again, this I'm just speaking for myself. I feel like it's not as exciting. It's like, oh, they're partnering with, they're partnering with Zippo. I bet it's going to be a red lighter with the Supreme logo on the side or something. It's like everything kind of looks the same.
Yes. Oh, didn't LaRue like tease maybe on April Fool's Day that they had a collaboration with Supreme, and it was basically just their shoe with a Supreme logo, and that's what it would look like. You're so right.
Right. It's like a joke, but that is probably what it would look like. And like that's not totally true. Supreme has done some different stuff. I remember I used to love when I was like in high school, I had these Nike indoor soccer sneakers that I wore all the time, the Gato. And Supreme randomly like did a collab with Nike and revived this sort of obscure indoor soccer sneaker. And it was not just red. They did, and the Supreme logo was tiny, but they did it in a bunch of cool colorways, like a sort of powder blue. And I remember thinking like that was really cool. And I'm sure I don't keep up with all their drops, so I'm sure they do other stuff like that. I don't want to make it sound like every single thing they do is just like, the laziest branding. But definitely a lot of stuff is just, if they do a collab with some brand, it's like just that brand's product, but red and with the Supreme logo. And
Yes.
I feel like maybe that's just not as exciting after a couple years. I don't know. That's my personal feeling. And then compare that to someone like Kith, who I think is another big like sort of streetwear entity that does lots of cool, exciting stuff that doesn't always look the same. I don't know. So I think the sameness is maybe a part of that. And then just with the selling point was sort of like the hype around it. And if that sort of cools off, it's like, what's left? Like, is the product like really blowing people away without the hype? I'm not sure.
Yeah. And honestly, that model, their products being streetwear, that was kind of more novel when they started, and also their drop model and their store model. Like everybody's kind of hijacked their model. And so it's become less compelling. I have to wonder, I haven't dug in enough. They've recently opened a lot of international stores, Milan, Berlin, China, and they're seeing some traction there. So maybe it's something where like we're tiring of it, but in the States, but there's opportunity elsewhere. Something to watch. And also just really interesting. Like, does it immediately lose its cool factor when VF Corp scoops it up, a streetwear brand? It's like cool subculture brand goes corporate. It's definitely, there's word that they're going to have like some independence, just like I think their Oakley brand does. Own space within our house brand portfolio is how the CEO framed it. But we'll see. To be determined.
Yeah. And I actually remember a couple of years ago when VF first scooped them up, hearing something from an anonymous source that there was a little bit of culture clash internally between like sort of the old Supreme and then like the new corporate kind of Supreme. I was never really able to get like too much more detail beyond that, but I did hear that there was a little bit of that going on internally. So yeah, you're right though, that the novelty is not really there anymore because that, like you said, everyone does that model. Like it's been appropriated by, sock brands, and like everyone is doing drops and stuff. So there's just not as much kind of that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with them.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you remember Supreme Italia? That was like the fake Supreme that. Do you remember that? They like,
and they got in trouble. They were just hijacking the whole name. Yeah.
It was a different company. It was like because of some arcane copyright loophole, they were like registered in another country so it was like this Supreme logo, but it just had Italia under it. And I think Samsung or some big like tech company like announced a collaboration with Supreme and brought this guy out who they called the CEO of Supreme, and it was like some random dude. And it turned out it was Supreme Italia, and like they got fooled by it. So for a time, I think like Supreme doing a collab with them was so desirable that people were like being tricked into doing like fake collabs with like scam companies because they wanted to collab with Supreme so bad.
That is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's during, like, I consider the heyday of Supreme, like during the Louis Vuitton collaboration time.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
The buzz was hot. It's losing value. Resale value is the word on the street. There's also the word that the original founder, James, is it pronounced Jebbia? Anyway, will have a role within the company. I don't know. I'm not an insider. I wonder if the participation or the ability to run things, like if that will be more so under the new model, and if that will make a difference in terms of revenue. Like the more independence, the better it will do. I don't know how either conglomerate runs things.
Yeah, I don't know. Definitely will be interested to maybe just observe from as a consumer, like how things change at Supreme under EssilorLuxottica. I do know that one thing, you mentioned this, but one thing they did do under VF was expand internationally a lot. I think especially in Asia, they like opened stores and did a lot more distribution there. So yeah, I think maybe the best thing about the Essilor acquisition is that they are this big company that has international distribution, although Supreme already had that with VF. So who knows? We'll see kind of like what changes happen here. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. And we just have to mention that LVMH, since 2015, LVMH and Kering have launched their own eyewear, I don't know, brands, hubs, arms. So Telios or Thelios with LVMH, and then Kering Eyewear. And so they've come out with their own, more competition, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Let's move on to our next topic, which is Coperni, who we all know from the famous spray-on dress moment, which I still think is so cool. But it came out this week that their Paris Fashion Week show is going to be at Disneyland in Paris, which is a first not just for Coperni, obviously, but also I think for Disney to host a Paris Fashion Week show in Disneyland. And I know Disney does not mess around with their sort of brand image and, their parks especially. They do not like ruining the magic or doing anything that's like off brand. So it was a little bit interesting that I don't really think of Disneyland as like a place for cool modern fashion design. But maybe that's kind of the idea, that it's unexpected. And there was a quote from one of the co-founders in this Women's Wear Daily article about the show, where he said, "The backstage area will be at Cinderella's Inn. It's so funny." So I think that they are aware that it's like kind of funny, and that's like part of the appeal of doing it. What do you think, Jill?
I think so too. And they have a reputation for doing something, like you said, Bella Hadid's dress. They've done a drive-in fashion show during the pandemic. They did this robotic dog deal. Anyway, it reminds me of, totally different approach, but like Rebecca Minkoff, every fashion week, we know she's going to do the next thing, whether it's an NFT or she's going to do try before you buy. And that's just what she does. And I think, as fashion people and the fashion community, we've been seeing girls walking up and down the runway for years and years and years and years. And the idea is to get people talking and to, and social media, some virality. I think that fashion people like a gimmick. Like they do. They want something fresh. They want something to talk about, even if it's a little silly.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, Coperni is good at that. I think you're right that there's so many shows have very much the same format and nothing really is different. And I always think like it doesn't feel, I'm probably going to sound like so presumptuous, but it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to kind of like think of, I don't know, some sort of unique angle. Like it feels like it doesn't take that much. Even the robot dog, I'm like, they just brought a robot dog out and just put it there, right? I don't remember. I don't think they built the robot dog themselves. I don't know where they got it from. But that's like memorable, and we're still talking about it later. Yes. Disneyland is also... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where did Vogue World just happen? Because that was also a first of its kind event. It was in Paris. I honestly forget the location, but there was a lot of talk about like nobody's ever been able to do a show here. This is wow. So maybe this is like a trend, and like we've seen a lot of shows in amazing locations outside the Eiffel Tower and all these amazing backdrops, but kind of going there first. I think more designers will get inventive.
Yeah.
We'll see.
It was the Vogue World was the Place Vendôme, which is like a square
Thank you.
in Paris. Yeah. So actually, I was thinking about the Disneyland thing and how kind of a weird choice it is. Like I associate Disneyland, no, sorry, to Disney as kind of like a cloying, like saccharine, like money sucking kind of experience. But
But it's happy
which is
place.
maybe I haven't been there in a long time. I'm also thinking of the American Disney World and Disneyland. So maybe the Paris Disneyland is like more chill. But one thing I think there is sort of an overlap, speaking of like engineering these moments, is like Walt Disney, obviously, like the Imagineers. This is like Disney's PR speak here, but like they're all about like engineering magic, like using technology and these innovative kind of engineering methods to create something that feels kind of like magical and memorable. And I actually feel like that's an overlap, I think, with Coperni, which is they're good at creating those kind of moments. Like honestly, the spray-on dress, I think, is a perfect example of that. Like it's not something you could buy, and it's not even something that's really practical, but they used it to create a sort of like memorable moment, So that I feel like there is sort of a thematic overlap with Disney in that way.
Yes, I agree. I wonder what the clothes are going to look like. The show will be, quote, inspired by Disney's cast of princesses, but basically they said like in a modern Coperni way. So I don't know what that means. Disney does have like, I would say, kind of like there is a cool factor, or there could be a cool factor, or fashion has this kind of love affair with it and with other things that we've talked about in the past. Like you hated some SpongeBob collaboration, let's say cartoons. Looney Tunes characters have made have appeared in various collections over the years. There are all these celebrities that are like Disney nuts, like Kourtney Kardashian. Like she's made it a character on the Kardashians, basically. Like she talks about it all the time. And then I will have to say, like, reference back like, when I was cool in the 90s, like cool girls were like all black. And there were a couple of things you could get away with, like leopard print. And then all the cool girls, for whatever reason, had like a vintage Mickey Mouse t-shirt. Like you wore that, you wore like your low slung jeans, like anyway, it was a look, and it's so random. But like, anyway, it can be cool, I will say.
I think so. I think for me, like what makes it hard to make it cool is like how humongous and dominant Disney is in like the media landscape. It's like hard for it to feel countercultural when like, you go to the movie theater and 9 of the 10 movies playing are Disney movies. And they've bought 21st Century Fox, and they bought Marvel, and they bought Lucasfilm, and like it's a little bit like, can you be cool and countercultural with this thing that is like so dominant? And maybe you can, and maybe that's like the idea is that they're subverting that or whatever. But that's why I was like a little skeptical of it. But I think the cool factor for me is coming completely from Coperni, like. And also, well, our colleague Zofia, who's in London, also said that in the Paris Disneyland is much more casual, and the princesses are like smoking cigarettes and stuff. Maybe she didn't say that, but it feels like they're a little less concerned with like the brand image, and that's part of why I think American Disney World stuff like doesn't feel very cool to me, because it feels so like concerned with brand image and so protective. And not very like loose. And like, that's kind of what I associate with something that's more fun and cool, is not being like overly concerned. And I feel like Disney's infamously like very protective of their image. I mean, I know some people who have worked as princesses and stuff in Disney World, and it's very strict. Like you can't do this, you can't do that. Like you can't be seen doing this at all. So I don't know. That's my feeling on it. Maybe Paris is different.
Yeah, I think everyone is intrigued just because, like you said, it is a cool brand. And I think it has to be a cool brand to get us talking about it. Like if a brand that was like colorful, like I don't know, Kate Spade, and they're bright and they're fun, and they were showing at Disney, we'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, that's a great example. Yeah. I think if Kate Spade was showing at Disney, it would feel much less unexpected and maybe like less interesting for that reason. Not that Kate Spade is an uninteresting brand, but just because there's not as much of a contrast.
Right on. Totally. Agreed.
Cool. Let's talk about our last topic, which is the timely peg is that Balenciaga announced this week an app that it's releasing for the Apple Vision Pro. But I kind of wanted to just talk about the Apple Vision Pro in general. So Balenciaga released an app for this extremely expensive Apple VR headset. I think it's like $3,500, which is insane. And the app kind of lets you view, I think, like 360-degree drone views of the Balenciaga Spring Summer show. There's also like an interactive lookbook that you can like browse through with your hands and stuff, and previous collections and things like that. It seems like fine and fun and like kind of the same stuff you'd find in a normal like sort of mobile app. The thing that's interesting to me, though, is like I don't think the Apple Vision Pro has sold very well. I saw that it probably will not break 500,000 units in this first year, or maybe just over 500,000 units or something, which is pretty. I mean, they sold like 50 million iPads last year or something. And obviously the iPad has been around for longer, but it's like very small by Apple's standards. And Balenciaga is not the only fashion brand to do anything with it, but it feels like, I'm like, do people really care about this thing? I feel it's so expensive, and it seems so like cumbersome and weird to me to use. And but maybe like the Balenciaga customer is the kind of person who might have one because it's so expensive. I don't know. So I just have sort of like weird feelings about the whole thing. But I'll stop there. What are your thoughts on it?
I was seeing the same data, the same stats. Not only is it not selling, there was someone said expected U.S. sales expected to decline 75% in the current quarter. It just came out in February, so it just launched internationally in late June. Maybe it will pick up internationally. I would just say, like, talk about like lack of cool factor. Like, I mean, it is very expensive. You need it to become covetable for this to take off. Like, what celeb, what cool people have it and are kind of flaunting their wealth by using it? Like, I'm not seeing any of that. So it seems silly at the moment. Do you know that, did you happen to also Google via the chat GPT or whatever the Google answer serves up? I was like, what does it cost to create an Apple Vision Pro app? Because, there's a lot of marketing investments that are very high investments. And literally when you compare what people are spending on an influencer, like it said, for a medium complexity app with the basically the functions that we're talking about here with Balenciaga, some custom 3D assets, a medium complexity app can cost between $48,000 and $96,000. Obviously, I don't think that factors in like any sort of a partnership with Apple and maybe like a monthly whatever to keep it going, all the things. But the fact that we're talking about it and it's had a lot of press, I mean, I think it paid itself off. Like it's not bad.
But I agree. Like it definitely paid itself off in terms of like press. It also at the very least, it reminded me that they have a show coming up. Which I'm not going to watch through the Apple Vision Pro, but I'll probably like watch it through normal channels. But I'm also just like, how many people are actually own and then are using this thing? Maybe they own it and are not even like, it's gathering dust. But like, to your point about like, it needs to be covetable. It's not something you can really show off. Like you can't walk around wearing it the way you could with like an iPhone and like have a cool case on it and everyone can see it or something. It's sort of like very private. And then I remember when they were launching it, like I think we talked about it at the time, I was just like, what problem is this solving that is not like, how is this improving on the phone and laptop combo? It's like, you can do something here and then get up and walk over here and do it. And I'm like, I can already do that with like my computer and my phone. I do something on my computer and then I walk in the other room and use my phone. You know what I mean? It's like, this doesn't feel like a quantum leap at all, but it was sort of being presented as if it was. And I just was like, it felt very much like a hype bubble to me. So
it's probably because when people wear it, you look like you're from the future, like you look like a robot and they're just like, this is the future because it looks so silly. It looks like the old, like 1980s, what we'll be doing in the year 2000. Like, they want to make it work.
It has to be futuristic. Otherwise, it's just like looks silly. And it's like, they have to be like, no, it doesn't look silly. It looks futuristic. Like this is what the future will look like. So I feel like fashion is a little bit susceptible, as is everyone, to like kind of buying into this stuff maybe when it's a little unproven. I mean, we talked a lot about like NFTs and how fashion brands got really in on that. And I feel like that market has kind of fallen away. There was just an article the other day from Goldman Sachs about how like all the AI investment from last year has not really produced much results for the companies that have invested in it. Like most of the money from AI has just been the investment into it. Like no one's like really gotten a great ROI on it yet. And the through line between like all of these things is that I'm like, what is this doing for the customers? Like the people who like that you couldn't already do, or like, how is it improving? And I just like feel like none of it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a party
like
pooper with a lot of this stuff. I'm sorry, but I just am like, why would I want to spend $3,500 on an expensive headset and then like look at some pictures of Balenciaga clothes? I could do that on my phone already.
And I am the naive hopeful over here going, well, Danny, it's only phase one. Like, it's going to be better than this.
That's what they always say. It's always improving.
It's improving. And you got to, like, it's interesting that the only other kind of ultra luxury brand to go there is Gucci. They're both under the
Gucci,
Kering
yeah.
umbrella. Would love to know about like Kering's take on this and maybe their Apple relationship. What's going on here?
Yeah. And there is like some kind of overlap between Apple and luxury companies. I mean, like they've worked with Hermes on Apple Watch bands. Who's that guy? Ian Rogers was at Apple for a while, and then he was at LVMH. So like there's kind of a crossover there, and like certainly a lot of Apple products are luxury products. So I think it makes the most sense for brands like Gucci and Balenciaga. Although I saw that there's also like My Teresa is doing some stuff with the Apple Vision Pro. I think J. Crew has an app as well. I'm not sure what those apps do exactly. But it does seem like luxury is maybe the best position to like do anything with it, just because if you bought a $3,500 headset, you're possibly a luxury customer already.
It's a safe bet.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on this, on the Balenciaga app in particular, or just like Apple Vision stuff?
No, I mean, I think that their work here is done. We're talking about it. We'll see what goes from here. I don't think that this Apple Vision Pro, it has a long way to go before taking off and being impactful in terms of traffic or awareness or sales or whatever the goal here is, if there's anything beyond marketing.
Yeah. My personal final thought is that with VR stuff, because like it's not the first virtual reality headset. There was the Oculus, there's like the HTC Vive, I think, and they've been around for like a decade or something. And I think none of them have really like become super mainstream. And I think they all have sort of the same problems, which is they're really expensive and they're really cumbersome. And like, I would think if I was launching a VR headset and I really wanted it to take off, I would work I mean, I know there's like probably a limit to how cheap you could make it, but I would work really hard on like going down, like trying to make it more affordable, more common, more easier to just like get it and put it on. And Apple, I think, went the opposite direction of making it like more expensive and more intense. And I feel like that's the opposite of maybe what they should have done if they wanted it to be like sort of widely adopted. Because like none of those VR headsets that have been around for years have become widely adopted either. So
I mean, and am I right? The only people using them are people who are gamers, and I get yelled at every time I don't know, allude to the fact that gamers are all young, but they're young. Many are young, I mean, and they don't have $3,500.
I think you're not wrong. Yeah,
I
think you're not wrong. And yeah, definitely a lot of like existing VR headsets, I think, are probably primarily used for gaming. I know there's other stuff you can do with it, but I don't think you're wrong to say that that's a big part of it. I mean, I have known many young children, young cousins and friends, nephews and nieces who are like obsessed with their Oculus or something and like spend hours like flailing around and like knocking over bookcases with the headset on.
Yeah, I think my niece would geek out if I gave her a headset. She would love it.
Yeah, but like, are those people also going to be like, I can't wait to put on my headset and like explore, you know, the Balenciaga lookbook in VR or something? I'm like not saying nobody's doing that, but to me, I'm like, I could just look at the pictures on my phone and for free, basically. So
it takes a unique person. My nephew's always like, is that Gucci? I'm like, why do you know Gucci? Anyway.
Oh, one more thing actually related to this. Can you tell me about that Brunello Cucinelli chatbot you were messing around with the other day? Because I feel like that's kind of similar.
I was going to put it in my luxury briefing this week. I was going to say...
we can skip it.
No. It already went out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wanted to be like, here's the lesson. Like, don't treat the Brunello Cucinelli chatbot like you do Siri. I wanted to, like, it's kind of like, what is, it cues you up, something like, ask any question or ask me something. And so I was having fun. Like, I'm like, what's the shoe of the season? Like, I thought I'd get some fun answers. But anyway, it has limited capabilities, I would say. Zofia on our team found that, like, I mean, it's a useful tool for reporters. You can ask about earnings and
like
the
revenue figures and stuff.
Totally. Which that's fun. But I think it's very, anyway, we'll see if it expands or evolves or it's doing what they intend for it to do. And they don't maybe want it to be super fun.
Yeah, I remember you sending a screenshot that was like, what's the shoe of the season? And the chatbot was like, I'm sorry, I can only tell you about the life of Brunello. And it's like, oh, well, that's like a little less cool. I don't really necessarily need the life story of Brunello Cucinelli, though. I'm like, want to know what shoe to buy. But I guess that's not what it is. I want
to have fun.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought of that because that conversation of like, is this actually solving a problem? Like, is anyone like, I really want to talk to a robot about the life of Brunello Cucinelli? Like, is that, I don't know if anyone's like really desperately needing that. Whereas a chatbot that could tell you, like, give you product recommendations or like that, or your question, what's the shoe of the season? It'd be like, the shoe that everyone's buying right now is this one or something like that. To me feels more, useful.
I agree. Come on, Brunello. Get it together.
All right. Let's wrap it up there. Jill, this was a great conversation. Thank you for being here, as always.
Thanks for having me.
For those of you listening, don't forget to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to this. That helps us out so much. And don't forget to subscribe to the Glossy podcast because you'll hear interviews with industry insiders every Wednesday and weekend review episodes every Friday. Jill, who is our next guest on the regular Glossy podcast?
It is a duo, the Addis and Christy Dawn Bushkowskis. And let's just say, like, the clash of their zen. I didn't know Amma, who goes on tour and hugs people. They know all of these great zen things. I felt like we were vibing, but like I was trying very hard to be zen. They're amazing. And they do an amazing sustainable fashion line that's really caught on. Farm to closet fashion is the whole concept.
Well, that sounds very fun. If you want to hear Jill having a hard time keeping her cool on a podcast, check out the Wednesday episodes. And until then, thank you for listening.
Thank you.